obviously, like, going into this, like, you knew that, as you mentioned before, like, you started off with like a single problem, and then you said, oh, why can't it have this? Added that. Why can't it have this? Added that. So you had like this kind of progressive sort of like train of thought of like, I had this initial problem, but now after kind of like trying to solve this problem, I ran into like a few more, and then like I solved them, and then it kind of snowballed into this super complex product that you said, hey, this actually has the potential to solve problems that are much broader than the one that I'm currently kind of facing now that other people might have as well. These are kind of like answering some of the known unknowns. Like, I have this known problem, and like there's a sort of unknown solution that I'm kind of trying to like get to, but then there's also these like unknown unknowns that you didn't even know like you would kind of encounter before like finding them. Like, do you have any examples of like any like unknown unknowns that you kind of just uncovered along the way and you're like, oh, that's fun?
There are plenty. There are plenty of fields where we knew that we would be going in a little bit blind.
Mm-hmm.
So for example, with a product of this level of complexity, you need to have a fairly clear strategy on which parts are computed where. So you move your finger over a touchpad. Now there are quite a few different checkpoints that you go through before that signal is sent to your computer, and even aren't done with the journey, until your system knows what to do with that motion that you just did on a touchpad. There are so many different touch points in between that you have to go through. Okay, which keys are pressed on the right side? How does the right side of the keyboard communicate with the left side to the module? Then from the module back, what is already computed on the module? What is computed on the keyboard? What is done system side? So this entire pipeline, mapping that out in detail, was a journey. So yeah, that was a real journey.
And then there's also, I guess, like the topic of having modules on both sides seems trivial, but then you have the like issue of flipping the pins, or like, how does the signal then, know that it's on the left side, not the right side? Like, I feel like that's also a crazy one, right?
Yeah, like the two-way communication between the module and the keyboard, because you have to quickly like think about when does the input signal decide whether it comes from the left or from the right side. So when you move on a touchpad up, well, on a laptop you know where up is.
Yeah.
When you switch a module between sides, how do you know where up is?
Yeah.
And then you have to figure out, okay, where in the process do I compute that step? So that's the firmware side. You will eventually have chats with Kalen about this in much greater detail, I'm sure. Another really interesting one is the issues that come with sourcing. Purely given the size of our company, the kinds of come along with finding partners for every single piece and figuring out, okay, where can we use something that is standardized? How do we exactly make this part to be producible, repairable, manufacturable, but also in a sensible price range, but also keeps all of the other features we want intact, especially given the kinds of space limitations that we are working with. And that every single change, like every tiny change you make, has ripple effects on so many other things. I think that was one of the longest journeys, or the most difficult things to get finalized. The topics I just talked about are all purely product side. I think we shouldn't neglect that most of the challenges, like if we talk about a broader spectrum, what are the challenges on the product side? Most challenges that come from building a hardware company are on corporate structure wise. Your inventory, your warehousing, your operations, your logistics, your supply chains, your initial sourcing, but also your financing, your pre-financing, because there are so many moving parts. Lead time management, making sure that quality control is flawless. There are a lot of moving parts that can very, very quickly spiral extremely out of control. There we are extremely lucky that we have the experience from having run hardware for a while now, because starting with a product of high complexity in a field like this requires some serious expertise if you build this entire structure from scratch. Yeah, I think if we really look at what are the hardest things, then I'm happy that I'm working on product side.
Okay. I'm happy I'm in marketing, because I could handle the product side.
There are a lot of moving parts that have to work well and have to really be aligned perfectly as well. So between all of the different segments of a company, everything always has to be aligned. If operations does one thing, marketing does a completely different one, and nothing has anything to do with product, then you really run into issues. That is That is the kind of scenarios that really are the most challenging, I feel like.
Right. So given your previous knowledge with hardware, with Arc, and now very newly with Naya, is there anything that you would have done differently with the knowledge that you have now?
Everything. No, I think the better question is, what would you not have done different?
Okay.
There aren't many things. With every week and every month, you learn something new. What you learned, you will try to apply. And in that application, you're like, why didn't we do this earlier?
Yeah.
There is a reason why companies, once they have certain established procedures, don't move away from their procedures because they're so used to them, even if there's a better option.
Mm-hmm.
But when you see what the new option can do, you notice why, well, the other option probably wasn't great. And obviously, after you always know better. But there's no realistic world where you know the afterwards beforehand. So asking why didn't I do it right away this way is, well, because you didn't know. It's also really interesting that whenever a new person comes on board, they bring their own experience, their own knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
And their own expertise. And then they say, hey, why don't we do things this way? And they're like, yeah, that's right. Why don't we do things this way? Let's do that.
Right.
And that happens in every single field. That happens product side, that happens on logistics side, operations, finances, marketing. Really, whenever a new person comes in, it's like, okay, here's everything we do. What do we think we do wrong?
Yeah.
It's like, let's talk about everything that is wrong and fix it.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's one of the most fun procedures. Hearing someone new come in and just rip apart everything you've been doing. It's great.
Yeah.
I had a conversation a while ago with a party that became one of our investors later on, where we had a bit of a chat about this environment of, well, everything being kind of put together as it is needed in the moment, because you don't have the time to spend month and month on setting up a specific procedure that you really don't need yet in much detail.
Yeah.
So it's like everyone just puts in their first best guess. What's so fun about this is that everyone is engaged in, oh, what is the procedure here? Let's put something together.
Yeah.
So a lot of new ideas come up, and in a place where a lot of new ideas come up, even if 99% of the ideas are terrible, there is a percent of ideas that are actually great.
Mm-hmm.
And that percent, I think, is a huge part of being a startup.
Mm-hmm.
There are so many ideas because so many people are engaged with it. So many people enjoy being in that environment and have ideas about everything, that the most challenging part is figuring out, okay, so here's a million ideas. What do we do with them?
Yeah.
And the larger a corporation gets, the more you run into the issue of, okay, so what ideas do we have, right? You run out of ideas because everything is too well established and too well evaluated.
Yeah.
And on the opposite end, you have the problem of having too many ideas and needing to figure out which ones you actually pursue.
Exactly.
So yeah, it's a really, really interesting dynamic that happens there.